We've got a really exciting panel today. We're talking about embodied carbon. If you are not interested in hearing about embodied carbon, it's probably time to go. No, we're all good. Things are being launched today. We've got an amazing panel. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to introduce our speakers right now while we figure out the slides. The slides have gone missing. Rest assured, they will be found. So I'm really excited to introduce to you Katie Isles, the embodied carbon lead at NABERS. Katie's team is developing the embodied carbon standard that will apply to buildings across Australia. A core aspect of this work is collaborating with people across the building industry to ensure we develop a tool that's trusted, meaningful, and drives behaviour change to reduce emissions. And that's what we're all about today, isn't it? About reducing emissions and increasing sustainability. Then we're going to hear from Alison, Scotland, the Executive Director at ASBEC. Alison represents the collective vision of built environment peak bodies across Australia and thinks that collaboration is the best solution to our sustainability challenges. And then we're going to hear from Thomas Hobbs, Design Director at the Danish architectural practice Henning Larsen. After over a decade in Copenhagen, Thomas recently returned home to Australia to establish the Sydney studio and lead the design and delivery of Henning Larsen's Australian portfolio. And we have Jorge Chapa, which I think everyone in the room will know. Jorge is the Chief Impact Officer at the Green Building Council of Australia. Jorge ensures GBCA's strategic priorities, partnerships, products and services, including Green Star, accelerate the transformation of Australia's built environment, delivering healthier, more resilient and positive places for people and nature. He is equally well known for his out-of-office recipes, and I encourage you to ask him about those at a future break, but not in the questions. More known for his recipes. Look, we don't really have enough time, right, today to get really into embodied carbon. We've got 40 minutes, maybe a little bit less now, and it's a complex and absorbing topic, and people have been trying to crack it for a long time, and these people are going to tell you how we're getting really close to doing that. So I think we're just going to get into it, and with that, Katie, over to you.
Alrighty, I'll try and picture the slides in my head and we'll see how we go. So I guess to start with, for embodied carbon, we're aiming to do something similar or along the same lines as what we do with all our other rating types, energy, water, waste, indoor environment. Essentially have that 6-star rating scale so that you can simply see what you've achieved compared to other similar buildings and be able to communicate that really easily. So NABERS has been working in this space for since about 2021, so coming up to 5 years now, and what we've been doing is spending a lot of time talking with hundreds of people from across the building industry, everyone from the people who kind of are responsible for making the decision to build low carbon, developers and building owners, through to all of the people who they work with to actually create the buildings, and then also through to the people who are making the products that the buildings are built out of, product manufacturers. So yeah, we've been talking with all of these people to come to a set of principles around what we actually need to do if we want to measure embodied carbon in a building. Ooh, great, we have slides. I will. Oh no. Not showing on the screen yet? Okay. Oh no, they've gone. Sorry. Yeah, so what we've been doing is talking with all these people to come together on a set of principles for what we need to do if we want to measure embodied carbon in a building. So things like knowing what is it that we need to measure. Are we kind of trying to go for... Yay! Yeah, all right, I'll just forward through. Okay, so yeah, I think I missed a couple of things. This is stuff that Carlos and others mentioned earlier, but yeah, tackling embodied carbon, the third big thing that we need to do to reach net zero. It's urgent now because we know that embodied emissions are becoming the main source of emissions in a building, and recent information that we got from the Green Building Council is that we're already reaching about 50% in terms of what proportion of emissions are embodied emissions in a building. So, yeah, now we're back to kind of where we were, talking with hundreds of people across the building industry to decide on some principles for measuring embodied carbon. After spending a couple of years, going through all that and figuring out what everyone needs and what would work for everyone, we landed on some key objectives. So number one is driving action to urgently reduce embodied carbon, starting now, because obviously if we're talking about buildings, we're talking about, years of development to build a building. So we're locking in already decisions that are going to make a difference in a few years' time. So yeah, we basically just need to get started as soon as possible. And embodied carbon, of course, is a really complicated space, but there are things that we know how to do already that we can do. We can measure the embodied carbon in the majority of a new build. So let's just get started on that, and then all of the other complexities and bits and pieces that we don't know how to tackle so well right now, we can figure that out, as we go down the line. But let's just get started, on the biggest source of emissions. So, I think what's really important about the work that we've been doing the last few years is we've really gotten to a place of national agreement on embodied carbon and how to measure it. So we've been developing the embodied carbon standard with the Green Building Council, working really closely with them. Also working really closely with infrastructure bodies, so that, if you're working in buildings or in infrastructure, we're all working along the same lines, which really helps product manufacturers and everyone who works across both spaces. What we're doing is fully aligned with international standards for measuring embodied carbon in buildings. So obviously companies that are international, it should work for them here, work for them in other places as well. And the work that we've been doing has also been approved by the NABERS National Steering Committee, which contains industry representatives and government, from all states and territories. So yeah, really clear alignment across Australia in terms of what to do and how to do it. Let's take a bit of a look at what the embodied carbon standard will look like. These are a few of the principles that we aligned on with industry. We're focusing on new buildings and major refurbishments. We're looking at upfront embodied carbon. So what that means is capturing the emissions from developing the building materials, transporting them to site, and going through the construction process. So everything up until the building has been built, focusing on that. Will enable buildings to, set targets and then certify that when the building is built, certify whether or not they achieve the target. And really importantly, it will encourage using products with known emissions. So what that means for the most part is products that have an environmental product declaration that meets the international standards. EPDs are really important because, or focusing on EPDs is really important for industry because it means that we're not trying to measure a building using averages. It means we're going, okay, what specific concrete product or what specific steel product are you using and what are the emissions for that product? It means that manufacturers have good reason to be driving down emissions and people that are developing lower carbon products or using lower carbon products are getting rewarded for that effort. So yeah, really focusing on understanding individual materials and what part they're playing in this process. So in terms of, when we're talking about, we're creating a standard, what does that mean? It's a combination of these things. So first of all, everyone agreeing on what source of emission factors to use. And of course, not all products have an EPD at the moment. So NABERS has been developing with industry a national database of emission factors that can be used for products if you're using products that don't have an EPD. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The second thing there is methodology, so having that set of rules around what to measure, how to measure it, what is appropriate evidence that you actually used this material and how much of it you used. So yeah, those first two, emission factors and the methodology for measurement, that's all about consistency, making sure that two people can measure the same building and arrive at the same result. Then, of course, we have the benchmark, which is, that star rating scale, which makes it easy to communicate what you've achieved or what you're planning to achieve. And certification, which means NABERS audits what the information you've provided for a rating. We confirm that it's correct and means that everyone can trust that information. So those are the kind of the four pillars of what we're talking about in terms of creating a national standard. So let's talk about this National Emission Factors database. We do need it because there is currently no agreed source of emission factors that everyone is using across the building industry that is both up to date and also based on EPDs or product specific in nature. So what we've been doing over the last few months is working on collecting all of the EPDs that we could find for products available to use in Australia, creating a database of default emission factors that you can use if you are using a product that doesn't have an EPD, and we'll keep that up to date over time so that everyone has a source of what is the actual situation for Australian products. That we're actually launching in June, so in the next couple of weeks we'll let everyone know that it's available for everyone to use. That's pretty exciting. Everyone can use the same emission factors across both buildings and infrastructure. And the other thing that we're really excited to be announcing today is that pilot ratings are starting now. So we will be contacting heaps of people next week. Anyone who's put their hand up to be involved in piloting, a lot of other people that have been involved in consultation to date. You'll be hearing from us next week asking if you have some buildings that you'd like to put forward to actually pilot the process, check how it works, see what we need to do about making sure the rules are appropriate and achievable. That's really exciting. And if you haven't spoken to me about that before, reach out to me anytime, because we're always keen to hear about people who are interested in piloting. So that's about it in terms of NABERS. We're launching later this year, piloting now, training and rules to come. So if you're interested in becoming an assessor, you'll hear about that in the next few months. I think that's it for me. And I will hand over to Alison.
Story of my life. Sorry, Thomas, you will have to put that up later. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here, and thank you, NABERS, for having me here. I represent a wonderful collection of peak bodies and in the built environment sector, in the Australian built environment. And what happens when a whole range of diverse industry bodies agree, along with not-for-profits, that's really, really powerful. And what we see is embodied carbon is one of those things that requires extreme collaboration, and that's why we're big on it, and that's why NABERS is so good at it, because that's in their DNA. So I'm super excited to launch a supporting document, an issues paper that will help supercharge what NABERS is doing in relation to embodied carbon standardisation and measurement. Because we know that you can have the tool, you can have the measurement out there, but unless you have that supporting policy to really drive change, it's going to be really hard. So I'm thrilled to be part of a wonderful group of super embodied carbon nerds and absolute experts that have been working really, really diligently to drive or to analyse what other countries are doing across the world, what we need to do to really support this new embodied carbon tool. So a little bit about ASBEC. Up on the screen you'll see our industry bodies, our professional organisations. But what I love about ASBEC is we also have an amazing collection of government observers and partners and academic partners. It's a real wonderful safe space where we can talk about what we agree on in terms of sustainability policy. And in terms of impact, ASBEC's had a really fantastic impact working closely alongside government at all levels to drive down emissions. So, you know, we're focused on the UN Sustainable Development Goals and our Paris targets, but we've done some amazing work in relation to reducing operational emissions for buildings. But we realise we need to add to that arsenal of work. We know that operational emissions, we've still got work to do, and that will continue. But let's add to our repertoire of tools to try and drive down that carbon that's embedded into a building, you know, the moment it's created, because as we've heard many times today, that carbon will be still locked into that building in 2050. So really important there, and that's why ASBEC wanted to be involved in this work. So in terms of the project, wonderfully funded and supported by our federal DQ partners and NABERS, and then our fantastic team at ThinkStep, facilitated by Mansfield Advisory, really helped supercharge the process. And in terms of the process, at ASBEC, we didn't want to add another voice to an already very vocal industry. You know, there's so many fantastic initiatives going on in relation to embodied carbon. What we wanted to do was build on the success and the amazing consultation that NABERS and GBCA did in relation to their process. We wanted to build on what amazing work infrastructure is doing in relation to understanding what's happening in terms of their value chain. We wanted to see what's going on all across the globe, you know, those amazing things that are happening, how other countries are dealing with that embodied carbon question in relation to, you know, what are they focusing on first, how are they doing it, what type of policies do we have. And we had some clear goals. So, you know, we knew that these statistics have already been mentioned earlier today by Carlos, by Davina, by Frankie. You know, the built environment come 2050 with our decarbonised grid, and now that we're really solving the efficiency, the building operations, embodied carbon is going to be one of those big problems that we need to solve, and we need to solve it now. So how to do this, you know, operational emissions, we've done it for a while. We've had some decades of experience to really know what we need to do. Embodied carbon is one of those things where it's not just a building. We need to look at the whole system. We need to be speaking to people that potentially the built environment wasn't speaking to so well before. So it's one of those things that only one solution, it's not going to cut it. So, you know, the NCC has been a really great lever for change in the past. We know the NCC needs to be part of that solution, but it's a lot more. How are we going to help our supply chain? You know, how are we going to make it easy and support people to use the NABERS tool? So it's one of those things that the scope of this project is really massive. What we wanted to do was focus immediately on the upfront carbon bit, because we know, again, we've got some tools there to help us. We recognise we've got upfront carbon, we've got the operational carbon. The future end state is a whole of life carbon understanding, moving to circular economy. But, you know, let's eat the elephant one bite at a time. This is a great time to act on embodied carbon and get some great policy expertise out there. So building on from the success of NABERS consultation, looking at the global policy out there, over 250 different policy mechanisms our wonderful ThinkStep team analysed. We had a lot more research. We mixed it all up together and popped it into the issues paper, which we are so excited to launch today. But that issues paper is the first step in our process. We want to hear from you. You are our embodied carbon nerds. We want to hear from you what you think is going to be the important nuts to crack to really get the scale of change that needs to happen. So we are opening consultation from now. I will be sharing a QR code later. And that will help us inform a comprehensive policy framework which will be published later on in the year. The intent of that comprehensive policy framework is to recognise again, we're not just looking at the building in itself. This is a whole supply chain issue. This crosses buildings and infrastructure. This is a really big team sport that we need to tackle, and there's probably going to be a lot more work that we need to do, but we've got a wonderful team to help us on with that. Ding ding, I need to stop talking, and I always do that. What I might do is a few things. So the intent of this paper, and that we want to test with you, is that the built environment can influence embodied carbon in two ways. Number one, it's the signalling, and we've heard that a lot today. So we signal to our industrial sector across our value chain that we want them to focus on abatement. The second one is we need to be more considerate about our use of resources. How do we design buildings in a more considerate way and use a decarbonisation hierarchy? The issues paper, we also want to test some dilemmas with you. There's a few out there. We love our alliteration. I look forward to exploring these dilemmas with you via the panel sessions, so I won't go too much into it. But the biggest thing I want to share with you, and I'll put it up on the screen now, we have the issues paper out. It's supported by an annex of so much information. It's incredible. It's a real capture of what's happening in relation to embodied carbon right here, right now. So I encourage all of you to have a look at that. We have a webinar alongside MECLA next week. We want to hear from you. I'll leave it at that, and I look forward to discussing this even further. And thank you.
Taking some souvenirs with me. Pop that here. Perfect. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's fantastic to be here today. My name's Thomas, and I'm from the Danish architecture practice, Henning, Larsen, and I really wanted to take the opportunity this afternoon to invite you into our design studio, into our design community, and give you a bit of an insight into the way we work, some of our design methodologies, and also how these methodologies are actually applied in practice. This is our studio in Copenhagen. We're 650 architects around the world. It's architects, landscape architects, urbanists, designers, many different disciplines, and we operate out of 9 design hubs, the newest of which is in Sydney. We opened an office here a year ago, so it's great to be back. For those that haven't been, this is Copenhagen, and it's really important to say at this point maybe that this Danish design heritage really permeates all of our projects in a really deep way. The way the Danes think about people and planet in their design approaches is something that we apply in our designs across all studios. In Sydney, we're lucky to have a fantastic building designed by a Dane, the Opera House, and really it's a city with a fantastic icon. And when you think about Denmark, it's really a city without one. And for those that have been before, there is something, but perhaps she's the most disappointing icon of all. She's 1.2 metres high and pretty forgettable. But rather it's the livability and the quality of life that have become the icons of our city. And this is something that we really try to think about when we're working on assignments in different geographies. By 2050, 70% of the world's population are going to be living in cities. And what that means is we're going to need to build a new city for 1.5 million people every single week. This is a really staggering number, and at the office we're trying to do our little part in this dilemma. And 15 years ago we created our sustainability team. This is 20 architects, computational designers, coders, anthropologists, material experts, and we really try to embed them in our design process at the start of the project, trying to understand what are the challenges, what are the potentials here, and how can we work together to find some solutions. So running on the slide behind me, this is some digital software they build for us. Depending on the challenge, we can sit down with some people far more computer savvy and clever than me to work out how we're going to tackle this. One of the things I'd like to talk about today is materiality, and all of you will know the image on the left, the food pyramid, of course. Remember to eat your greens and to try and avoid that steak. we thought it'd be really interesting to do the same for materials. So at the bottom, you see a lot of bio-based materials, materials like hemp, straw and timber. These are carbon sequestering, and we should be using a lot more of these. And then at the top, aluminium windows and of the like. So we try and share this knowledge with our collaborators and also clients to make more informed material decisions. And as Alison said, this is really a team sport. We're all in this together, and that's a big part of our ethos, that through exhibitions and this course we're running at the moment, which is called Unboxing Carbon, we go around and visit with our peers, but also people within the industry, to share the way we work and help to make better informed decisions around the materials we're specifying in our projects. On the left-hand side, we've got an exhibition on at the Danish Architecture Centre called Changing Our Footprint. And here we open our sketchbooks and computers and really share this data with everyone to try and make it a more open source discussion around embodied carbon. When I last checked, we're delivering over 370,000 square metres of projects around the world built out of bio-based materials. And this isn't just some sort of Nordic obsession with timber, but rather we try to apply the specific regional approach to where it may be. So, for example, at the moment we're delivering Denmark's largest CLT building. It's an office building in Copenhagen. But here in Canberra, we're working with a new building designed in hemp. So we try and find materials that are readily available in which the geography we're working. Today I thought it'd be fun to share 3 different projects with you, 3 projects of different scales, typologies, and in different geographies. The first one is a small school in Denmark. It's called Fellebella School. It's located in Rønne, which is right in the middle of the country. It's 250 square metres, and it was designed on a really modest budget with a very ambitious client. It's 2 classrooms and a common area that create a frame around the existing courtyard space. And Fellebella School operates on a similar model to the Montessori schools that we have here in Australia. The teachers and the parents were super engaged, and together with them at the start of the design process, we said, okay, let's create some success criteria, some design dogmas that would drive the process. So for us, it was really interesting to work in biomass and construction, designing for disassembly, creating a fantastic interior climate, free of toxic chemicals, and also reusing local materials. So we took this information and went back to our studio and spent a few months in R&D. And what we ended on was a timber cassette wall panel with compressed straw. The straw is a byproduct of the agriculture industry, so it's a win-win there. And we found a company in Slovakia that was able to help us produce this cassette. Another fun material which we found while wandering the fjord was this eelgrass. It's a type of seaweed which turns out to be a fantastic filter. So this was integrated in some of the filtration panels. So it's really a pilot project for all of the different ways we could think about bio-based materials and sustainability in a really holistic manner. It's also designed for disassembly. So here you can see the facade or the wall cassettes arriving on site. And a little bit like Lego for adults, you get this quite simple instructional brochure, and within 3 days, the entire structural framework for the school was up. And what this project represents for us is a way to rethink about the aesthetic of architecture. It's about being able to line the project with a deep sense of social and environmental responsibility. And of course, there's a place for the loud and bright projects. But in this one, it's about educating the students about the type of building in which they're learning. This is a photo inside one of the labs. It's got a clay render, and then on the right you can see the ventilation panel with the vertical lines. Some very quick numbers. I'm not going to be too numbers heavy today, but it's got 6 kilos of CO2 per metre per year, which is around half the Danish standard, so a little less than the 500 that I heard in one of the earlier sessions. And for me, what's super exciting about this project is the scalability. So we developed this little jewel in the countryside in Denmark, and then we were approached by Bestseller. It's a huge company in Denmark, a fashion company, who needed a logistics centre in the Netherlands. And we said, okay, we've developed this wall cassette that could be a fantastic candidate for this project. So now we're working together with them on a 170,000 square metre logistics centre in Holland. And I think that's the possibilities that can be unlocked by really pushing the boundaries of material innovation. We're now jumping onto a ferry into the North Atlantic for the University of the Faroe Islands. This is a 8,000 square metre extension to the university there. And for those that don't know the Faroe Islands, it's sandwiched somewhere between Iceland and Scotland, so in the middle of nowhere. Incredible country with the most diverse weather you could imagine. During the summer, 20 hours of sunlight, so you're really spoilt there, but that's contrasted by 5 hours in the winter. And this was the starting point for us. How could we use the conditions of this place to be design drivers for the project? So we sat down with our R&D team. We were able to write some scripts that were able to analyse the thermal comfort of this place. On the left-hand side, you see the current condition. It's largely uninhabitable. The more yellow, the worse. The more blue, the better. And then Throughout the design process, we were thinking, okay, how can we work in both plan and section by inserting these buildings in to create a more comfortable thermal condition in the exterior. So the baseline, it's only possible to be outside for 45 days and be comfortable in the current site. We were interested in expanding this, but by placing the building correctly, we were able to multiply it by 3 and make it habitable for 150 days of the year. Working with the architecture was really important, shaping the roofs based on the sun direction, but also understanding the ancient traditions of the Faroe Islands. They have this incredible green roofs which they've been designing for centuries, so we were interested in creating a modern interpretation of that. That continued onto the interiors, where we were really inspired by the Viking longhouses and the smoke houses, which had incredible wood construction. So we followed along suit. And here you can see a view down the main internal street, which has got incredible daylight, something that's really important on this site, but also some thermal mass. The last project, and I'm keeping an eye on the time, is the World of Volvo. It's an experience centre that we designed for the car manufacturer, who are at a really interesting point in their journey as they move away from fossil fuels into a more electric future. And for them, what was really important is this branding exercise around the architecture. At the World of Volvo campus in Gothenburg, where this is located, 3 hours north of Copenhagen, this was to be a new meeting place. And when we sat down with the client, we developed this idea around a Swedish word called Elementslarten, which is this idea that you're able to roam anywhere on the land, pitch a tent where you feel like, and create this really accessible gesture through the architecture. So we created a building based on 3 trees. Inside the tree trunks, we placed all the dark functions, your amenities, your storage, all the things that you needed to hide away. And what that left behind was these very open, occupiable spaces that Volvo could inhabit in different ways. As always, something's happened with the slide here, but as always, we worked with our R&D team and optimised the design. We wrote a script that could help us minimise the material consumption while maximising the span of the timber. And prototyping, of course, plays a key role here. You can see my good colleague Frank getting to know one of the corner details on the timber, which was brought in from Sweden and Austria. And what you're left with is almost this cathedral of GLT and CLT, some incredible spans that, for me, really celebrate this idea of the traditional Swedish construction techniques with some very precise and modern interpretations. The landscape comes into the project, so here you can see the auditorium with some of the cars on exhibit. And last month we opened the doors, so it's a really exciting, been a really exciting period for the Volvo family. That's everything. Thank you very much.
All right, we've got a bit of time for questions now, but Thomas, Alison, Katie, could not have been more different presentations, and all super relevant, going right through from like measuring schemes to the policy we need to do to drive a bunch of the design stuff that Thomas is looking at in terms of reducing carbon and making livable spaces. Jorge, funnily enough, you didn't speak, but also you're out of the light. But there's a person sitting on the end of this panel called Jorge Chapa from the GBCA. One of the questions that's already popped up, and for your note, we're not going to do run around microphones today, so it's the app, and so I apologise. But Jorge, one of the questions that's come up today, but comes up all the time, is a discussion around how much of embodied carbon do we measure? In particular, we've got kind of upfront carbon, like once the building's built, and then the rest of the carbon throughout its life cycle. How should we be thinking about those two concepts?
First of all, thank you for having me, and congratulations also, Katie and NABERS team, for the launch of everything, and Alison, obviously, for the issues paper, because that's fantastic work, and I have to say, I feel terrible because I'm having to follow this guy who was amazing on the presentation. But so the question, we ask ourselves a lot that question, right? Like what we're focusing right now is upfront carbon. Why are we focusing on upfront carbon? And Katie and Alison said it well. But the key thing was for us a few years back, so obviously we run Green Star, right? Some of you would know this. And we've had the upfront carbon credit requirement now in the rating tool for a few years. And we landed at that point because we felt it was important to recognize that there is a carbon budget of 30 years at the time, now 25 effectively, between now and 2050. And so we were very much conscious that the more we could reduce that carbon today, effectively the happier we would all be. And that the question of looking at the whole of life carbon of the building is very valuable. It's an important design consideration. You should definitely do it. But a lot of the, let's say, the extra 20% or 30% of the embodied carbon piece that happens is going to happen in 2080. We're living in a very wildly different economy and situation then, and for us to be able to get to that point, and still for someone to make sense of, to think about how do I take care of the climate, we will have to have solved the problem right now. And it became important for us to say, let's really measure today. And hence the focus on upfront carbon that we were very much conscious of. And it mattered the more and more we kept looking at the grid, right? When we started the process for a long time, it was about operational energy. Now, thankfully, in a lot of the stuff, we tend to focus on operational energy, something that happens already. People already take care of that. So it was in addition to what could we do. And once you move into an all-electric building, as Katie said, you're pretty much in a 50-50 scenario right now between pretty much almost all upfront carbon and operating energy emissions. And so it does make sense to really focus on it and really try and draw it down. And it's also really hard to do. That's the challenge. So yeah.
Yep. Jorge, while you're talking, can you tell us a little bit about how NABERS, and this is a question also for you, Katie, but NABERS and GBCA, how's that going to work? How are they going to be different going forward?
With what we're going to do effectively, so we've been working with Katie and the team and NABERS at trying to make sure that things are aligning as best as possible. And we've helped them out in the consultation process. When the project first started, we kind of handed over everything that we've done, and we're like, this is our guidance. They worked through that, they consulted on that, it's changed a little bit, and now essentially they're kind of going, your turn, right? So they're giving it back to us. We will be adopting it in the rating system in terms to make sure that the guidance is essentially the same. The reference numbers that Katie is talking about, the reference emissions factors, we will adopt those as well. And we will make changes to the rating tool to account for these things. A good way of thinking about it for all of you who are Green Star users that have used the NABERS method is that we have a preference for getting everyone to use NABERS. So in operational energy, your first step is, are you eligible for a NABERS energy rating? Do not pass go, just straight, like go straight, nothing else. If not, then there's other options. We will aim to do the same for embodied carbon. If you can get an embodied carbon rating, that's your method. Just stop and keep going. And if not, then there will be a model situation that aligns in methodology, but we'll have to create a reference benchmark, but it will be aligned in the process and concept. So that's the plan. And finally, I should say, we will be incentivizing people with a leadership point. Those of you who go into the pilot process that already have Green Star registered projects, and there's about 500 Green Star projects that have to do upfront carbon emissions reductions calculations. We want people to test the NABERS approach, and then that also allows us to compare against our approach, and we can then adjust the benchmarks. And as people go through, we will roll out that as a sort of a permanent point for a block of time for projects that register there so that people can use it.
Thanks, Jorge. Moving on, Alison, before I rudely dinged you off the stage, you were presenting to us the 7 decarbonisation dilemmas. So we've got a feel now for what the issues are. But can you give us a bit of a sneak peek into what some of the policy options and solutions and where we might be heading are?
Yeah. Wonderfully, there are possible solutions listed as part of every decarbonisation dilemma. So I know you all have the issues paper up there on your smartphones now. A taste, we offer possible solutions as part of every dilemma, and we want your feedback on that. We've talked about a lot of them today. So, for instance, in terms of the direction, the signalling, the intent, we heard from Carlos earlier today, you've got the federal government in their environmentally sustainable procurement policy already prescribing a NABERS rating for embodied carbon. That is cool. We could also have the Australian Building Codes Board signalling intent that they're going to look at the measurement and reporting of embodied carbon. They're the kinds of things that we're looking about in relation to direction, so one of the Ds. Another one, going sort of beyond, the building itself and looking at the supply chain. We know that it's the NABERS measurement is going to, value products that have EPDs. So we know that there are going to be lots of producers and materials out there. They need to get EPDs, and there's a lot more building products out there that will want to and need to go through the EPD process. So how do we make that more accessible in the sense of can government have levers to make it cheaper? Can we help certain segments of the industry look at their EPD process and help them out, make it more accessible? Because we know the lovely NABERS adage, what's measured is managed, and simply the process of a manufacturer going through the EPD process, they understand more about what their processes are and how they can actually reduce their emissions, and it's all about the abatement. And then, design, we heard Frankie earlier, thinking about the way we design buildings, the way we use materials. Does the building even need to be demolished in the first place? And we're seeing innovations, say, in London, where planning is used as, why does this building have to be demolished? You give us a good reason. So there's so many different levers we can look at in terms of achieving impact. Just a taste.
Thank you, Alison. So we're getting the signal to wrap up pretty soon, but before we do that, I'm just going to push our luck a little bit by asking in that vein, Thomas, Jorge and Katie, if you've got your embodied carbon magic wand out, what is something, if one wish with the genie, I'm mixing my metaphors, I'm aware of that, what would it be when it comes to architecture, and from your perspective, Thomas?
Ooh, it's a broad question. I think there's, rather than coming some wishes with the crystal ball, there are some big potentials for us. I think adaptive reuse, particularly in Sydney, is a huge opportunity. When we're speaking with a lot of our clients on the market, there's a lot of B and C grade office stock throughout the city which is vacant. And so trying to understand the opportunities around that, whether it's adaptive reuse and transformation, where it also lines up in their business case. Because I think it's quite easy for us in the architecture world to lose sight of that for these projects to be realised, the commerciality of it really needs to stack up. So being able to remove the risk from that process and actually show that not only through an environmental lens, but also from a profitability lens, it's in their interest to do that. And a lot of that, Alison started to touch on it, is around the legislation. Money talks, and in order to initiate real change, quite often you need to legislate in a way that it promotes this change.
Thanks, Thomas.
I will say, broadly speaking, the same thing. Like the legislation is generally very important. If I can then add to what Thomas has said is, there's still a lot of work to do for us to get the information that we need to know for sure that we're accurately doing it correctly and that we're doing it well. When we look at, for instance, we've been asking for EPDs for a long time in the rating system. One of the things that we know is that there's barely any EPDs for anything that happens inside the shell of the building. And so there's still a significant amount of upfront carbon that is wasted over and over again in fit-outs and systems and ceilings and finishes and so on. So there is an aspect of how can we really drive the message that investing in disclosing those impacts actually matters and that there's value to it and that we need to incentivize that.
What about you, Katie?
For me, it would just be probably speeding up time, making the next 6 months or so go in 5 minutes, because we have people, beating down the door, just wanting this standard method that everyone can use to be able to compare and contrast and set limits and targets. And we know it's a few months' work away still, so yeah, if we could just have it done, that would be amazing.
All right, well, I want to say thank you all for joining us up here, and thanks for coming to the NABERS conference and talking to about embodied carbon. For your safety, don't move. They're going to construct a wall magically across there in the next few minutes, and then we will switch sessions. Thank you all for coming.